There's something viscerally infuriating about opening your fridge and realizing every single item inside is warming into lukewarm sadness because your power's been cut, and realizing at the same moment that your neighbor, standing smugly on her porch in yoga pants and a pearls and clipboard combo, is staring at you like she just kicked over your sandcastle and is daring you to rebuild it. Her name's Glenda. The type of person who lists her HOA title in her email signature and thinks decorative stones in the front yard is a felony offense. But this was war. Because Glenda didn't just cut my power, she literally sent a landscaper to dig up the ground behind my cabin and slice through the underground line, claiming it wasn't up to community standards. She did it knowing I worked from home, knowing I had a permit, knowing I'd catch her in the act. But she also knew one other thing. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to rage. I was going to get even. Quietly. Thoroughly. And with voltage. My off-grid cabin sat just outside the HOA boundary, grandfathered into existence decades before Glenda and her army of beige-brained minions took over the neighborhood. I had my own solar array, water tank, compost system, the works. But last winter, when a freak storm smashed 2 panels, I paid to temporarily connect to the community grid via a legal access point that ran through a shared easement. It wasn't glamorous, but it was approved by the town, signed off by the original HOA board, and fully documented. Glenda, however, had other ideas. The new HOA president, recently self-elected after her predecessor moved to Florida in what I now suspect was strategic exile, made it her mission to beautify the neighborhood. That was her word. Beautify. And apparently, a guy living in a cedar-shingled cabin with a goat named Waffles and a compost toilet was the blemish she couldn't tolerate. She tried fines. Dozens. All illegal. She sent threatening letters demanding I remove non-compliant structures from my own property. She called in a surveyor, who confirmed, embarrassingly for her, that not an inch of my land touched HOA jurisdiction. And so, in her final move, she dug up my power line like it was a garden weed. I caught the guy in a neon vest standing next to the trench, holding bolt cutters and looking nervously at a laminated map. He mumbled something about a work order from Ms. Glenda, and I just nodded, thanked him for the evidence, and went back inside. First thing I did? I installed a battery bank big enough to power a radio station and started charging it off my backup solar. Second thing? I paid a visit to my uncle, who owned a rather unique piece of machinery, a custom diesel farm generator from the 70s that was built like a war relic and probably illegal in 12 states. Third thing? I opened my permit files, checked the layout of the easement, and confirmed a delicious fact. The transformer box that fed both my temporary line and Glenda's house still technically belonged to the city. It had dual feeds, and I had access to one side. With a bit of rewiring and a heavy-duty extension through my barn conduit, I could flip the system on its head. But I didn't do it right away. That would have been impulsive. And I don't do impulsive. I waited until Glenda threw her Summer Serenity HOA block mixer in the cul-de-sac, complete with a catering tent, a harpist, and a no pets allowed sign that made my goat Waffles a personal enemy of the state. She went door to door delivering hand-pressed invitations, and when she arrived at my porch with her forced smile and manicured clipboard, she handed me one without a word. I took it, smiled back, closed the door gently. The night of the party, I let them get just cozy enough. Around 7:45 p.m., the wine was flowing, the harp was harping, and the LED fairy lights were glowing like a Pinterest post come to life. That's when I flipped the switch. It started small. A flicker. A bulb popping in Glenda's kitchen window. Then a surge. The LEDs flared bright white before dying like startled fireflies. Guests looked around, murmuring. Somewhere inside her house, a smoke alarm beeped. Then the AC unit made a sound I can only describe as mechanical choking, sputtered, and died. I watched from my porch, sipping lemonade and pretending to read a paperback I'd hollowed out for binoculars. Within 30 seconds, Glenda's entire house was groaning under a full, unregulated surge from a generator designed to power combine harvesters, not smart fridges. She ran inside screaming. I could hear her from my place, through closed windows. Lights blinked, fans rattled, something upstairs started sparking. Guests began backing away like the house was going to explode. And just when the harpist tried to lighten the mood with a soft G major arpeggio, the amp blew with a dramatic pop that sent everyone running like someone yelled, "Free HOA audit." It was glorious, controlled, precise, and completely deniable, because when the fire department arrived after the alarm panel tripped itself into a feedback loop, they couldn't find a thing. Her circuits were fried, sure. Her Nest thermostat was dead. Her fridge was hissing. But there were no visible causes. No breaches. No tampering. And since the easement junction was technically city property, the unidentified electrical incident went down as a municipal fault. Glenda, of course, wasn't buying it. The next morning, she marched straight to my porch like a caffeinated mall cop and accused me of cyber-attacking her house. Her words. I just blinked slowly, pointed to the goat chewing her prize hydrangeas, and asked if she'd like a glass of power-free lemonade. She turned purple, literally, and waddled away muttering about attorneys. She didn't know that was just the beginning. Because when you mess with my home, my power, and my goat's dignity, you don't just get a petty prank. You get the long game. And I had just begun to play. The best part of revenge isn't the payoff. It's the suspense you engineer for the other person. The little pauses where they don't know if the punishment is over or just beginning. Glenda had spent the morning marching up and down the cul-de-sac in her compression socks, calling emergency electricians, yelling at utility reps on speakerphone, and, most amusing of all, trying to submit a domestic sabotage report to the HOA's website. I know this because I installed a long-range Wi-Fi antenna months ago and could see the site's backend log. I wasn't hacking, just watching, like a spectator with popcorn, because Glenda was unraveling publicly, and I hadn't even gotten out my toolbox yet. By Tuesday, the damage to her house was estimated at $12,400. Her air conditioning system was toast, her subpanel was scorched, and her smart home system had shorted so badly it kept locking her bedroom door at random. She'd brought in an actual IT consultant, who, according to the neighborhood grapevine, aka Martha from across the street, told her the power anomaly was the most bizarre thing he'd ever seen. Meanwhile, I'd reverted fully to off-grid mode, sipping tea under my solar array, using my compost toilet, and living in peaceful, electrically unbothered bliss. But Glenda wasn't done. Her next move was pure Karen escalation. She hosted an emergency HOA board meeting in her garage. She didn't invite me, of course, since I wasn't a member, but she made sure to stand in her driveway shouting the agenda at full volume while neighbors awkwardly pretended to mow their lawns. I just happened to be trimming my rosemary hedge, so I got a front row seat. She accused me, loudly, of operating military-grade equipment and insisted I was hoarding backup power like a doomsday prepper. She even held up a blown-out surge protector as Exhibit A. Several residents looked confused. One brave soul, Stan from Lot 12, raised his hand and asked, "Didn't you cut his power first?" She ignored him. Flat out pretended he didn't exist. That's how I knew I was winning. When people like Glenda can't control the narrative, they just yell louder. That night, I made my next move. I visited her property line under cover of darkness, not to sabotage anything, but to leave a gift, a plastic pink flamingo wearing sunglasses and holding a sign that read, "Warning, power may surge at any time." I stuck it right in the middle of her hydrangea bed and left a little solar spotlight to illuminate it. She found it the next morning and, by 7:12 a.m., was out there in her robe, swinging a garden hoe like a woman possessed. Waffles, my goat, watched her from my porch with the judgmental glare of a silent film villain. By the end of the week, Glenda filed an official complaint to the city alleging that I was running an unregulated power operation capable of domestic terrorism. Those were her actual words. The inspector who came out was a guy named Kenny, mid-50s, always smelled faintly of barbecue and WD-40, and had inspected my place before. He showed up with coffee and a smirk, walked through my whole property, then said, "Yep, still boring and legal. You want me to let her know, or should we both just go home?" I told him I'd handle it. And I did, by writing a letter. An actual physical letter, delivered in an envelope, signed in blue ink. I addressed it to the HOA board but ensured it ended up in Glenda's hands. In the letter, I congratulated the board on its robust interest in neighborhood electrical resilience, and informed them that, out of generosity, I had recently installed a legal secondary transformer on my own land. This, I said, would allow select community members to apply for temporary generator backup power in the event of a blackout. All they had to do was apply via a formal request. I knew exactly what would happen. Glenda, convinced that I had some magical, industrial-level backup supply I didn't, would scramble to get control of it. And she did. 2 days later, I got a letter, again, physical, on HOA stationery with her signature at the bottom. She was formally requesting access to my generator resources in case of another power emergency. She even offered a $100 donation to the Neighborhood Utility Fund. I laughed so hard Waffles ran away. I didn't just say no. I said yes, with terms. I invited her over to inspect the system. And she came. Oh, did she come? She showed up with her hair shellacked into a blonde helmet, wearing a fake Burberry scarf and a notepad labeled "Due Diligence Log." I gave her the full tour. Showed her my old diesel beast of a generator, explained how it operated with manual switchovers, told her it wasn't wired to any house directly but could theoretically be toggled through the easement if an authorized user had the proper adapters and sequence code. I handed her a laminated emergency procedure with a dozen steps written in small print and included a clause that said, in the event of user error, all damages would be assumed by the requesting party. She nodded like she understood. She didn't. She saw buttons and switches and wires and convinced herself she was about to become queen of the cul-de-sac's new backup grid. That same afternoon, she called another emergency board meeting, this time in front of her garage, and declared she had secured access to private backup infrastructure and would be leading a community readiness initiative. I wasn't invited to that meeting either. But I watched. Because what she did next was truly incredible. She rewired her own house. With zero electrical experience. She hired the same landscaper who'd cut my line and told him to hook up the failsafe. What he actually did was connect her subpanel to an old RV power outlet on the edge of her garage. I knew this because I checked it the moment he left. The wires were exposed. No fuses. No load balancer. If she'd turned that on and flipped the switch to my generator, it would have roasted her house from the inside out. I debated letting it happen, but I'm not a monster. So I made one last move. I dropped off a second laminated card, this one tucked into her mailbox. It read, "Generator not calibrated for amateur installation. See Fire Code Section 904.12.1. She never responded. But she did bring in a real electrician 2 days later, who immediately shut everything down and left a warning tag on her breaker box in red tape. I still have a picture of it. So now we were even, right? Wrong. Because the best revenge wasn't the blackout, or the surge, or the goat who ate her hedges. It was what came next, something she'd never see coming. Something that would make her scream without ever touching a single wire again. And it started with a phone call. Not to her. To the IRS. You'd be amazed how quickly an HOA tyrant deflates when they realize their kingdom is built on financial sand. I wasn't even trying to get Glenda in legal trouble at first. I just wanted to rattle her. But when I filed a quiet little report with the IRS tip line about a certain neighborhood association holding dozens of public events with cash-only donations and no reported tax filings, let's just say the avalanche started rolling faster than I expected. I didn't forge anything. I didn't lie. I simply submitted a record of every HOA flyer Glenda had stuffed into mailboxes over the last year, scanned the donation request pages, and attached screenshots of her public Facebook posts proudly showing off successful fundraising totals. The HOA wasn't a registered nonprofit. They weren't licensed to fundraise. They certainly weren't filing 990 forms. And yet, over the past year, they'd collected close to $18,000 in voluntary neighborhood improvement fees. All of it tracked back to a PayPal account listed under Glenda's name. Now, I didn't expect an agent to show up overnight. The IRS doesn't exactly move at lightning speed. But I knew that someone would start looking. That someone would eventually send a letter. And Glenda, who kept all her mail in a little plastic bin nailed to the inside of her front door, would inevitably open it in the middle of dinner, glass of boxed Chardonnay in hand, and start to panic. That was the future. In the present, Glenda was still trying to rebuild her burned-out electrical system, scaring electricians off with micromanaging tantrums and confusing diagrams drawn in crayon. Meanwhile, I'd gone fully invisible. She hadn't seen me in days. I routed my errands through the back trail, covered my cabin windows with blackout mesh, even turned Waffles' bell collar inside out so it wouldn't jingle. And when you take away an HOA president's villain to fight, they start eating their own. It started with Glenda accusing Cheryl, the HOA treasurer, of deliberately stalling repair budgets. Cheryl responded by publicly demanding to see the HOA's book. Glenda predictably refused. That week, 4 members resigned from the board. A neighborhood group chat leaked. I saw screenshots. People were calling for Glenda to step down. Someone even posted a screenshot of her old Yelp reviews, exposing how she once left a 1-star review for a funeral home because they parked too close to her Lexus. Then came the letter. I didn't see her open it, but I knew the exact moment it happened. One minute she was pacing her porch in fuzzy slippers and barking orders into her phone. The next, she was frozen like a statue, holding a plain white envelope in one hand and staring down at it like it had just insulted her casserole. She went back inside without a word. And stayed there. The rumor mill exploded. Some said she'd been audited. Others said she was being sued. One guy, Doug from the corner lot, claimed he saw her shredding documents at 2 a.m. I didn't spread any of these stories, but I didn't stop them either. I just waited, watering my vegetables and fixing up the old barn like nothing was happening. Because my real plan was still in motion. See, while Glenda was busy dealing with phantom tax agents and mutinying board members, I was finalizing a deal with the one person in the neighborhood who could legally pull the rug out from under her. The land developer who still technically owned the common-use property deed. Most people had forgotten about him. His name was Dennis, and he lived 3 towns over. He'd built this entire neighborhood 15 years ago, and still held ownership over the HOA's recreational lots, the green spaces, walking trails, and, most importantly, the old utility shed tucked behind the storm drainage culvert. That shed wasn't just an eyesore. It was critical. It housed the outdated backup generator for the clubhouse and contained the main fuse cutoff for the entire HOA grid. And the HOA had never formally purchased it. I offered Dennis cash, above market, for the plot and structure. I didn't need the shed. I just needed what was inside. And Dennis, who described Glenda in our first call as that woman who sued me for having a blue mailbox, happily signed the deed over to me. Legally, I now owned the emergency fuse access point for Glenda's entire subdivision. And I had no intention of using it, unless provoked. I made sure she found out. Not through a letter. Not through a lawyer. I had a custom wooden sign made and installed it on the fence in front of the shed. Hand-carved, varnished, and mounted with steel bracket. It read, "Private property, Trespassers will be shocked. And underneath, in smaller letters, generator-controlled fuse system now owned by me. I didn't even put my name on it. She knew. The next morning, I watched from my porch as she stormed out in her workout gear, saw the sign, and screamed. Not yelled. Screamed. Like someone had just repossessed her favorite spa day. She tried calling the cops. They came, asked to see the property deed, and when I handed them the paperwork with Dennis's signature and the county stamp, they politely told her to stay on her side of the fence. She tried organizing a petition. Only 3 people signed, one of whom thought they were volunteering for the garden club. And then, finally, she tried pretending she wasn't rattled. She hosted a peaceful restoration picnic in her front yard, complete with paper lanterns, folding tables, and a hired acoustic guitarist. She invited every neighbor. She smiled. She served deviled eggs. And the whole time, her eye kept twitching like a Wi-Fi router trying to reconnect. That's when I decided to end it. Not with a bang. Not with a second surge. But with a quiet act of grace that would ruin her far worse than power loss ever could. I gave it all back. I filed to dissolve my newly acquired property into a conservation easement. Transferred it to the city's green infrastructure program. Once the paperwork went through, the shed would be demolished, and the easement would become a protected wetland buffer. Which meant the HOA would lose not just the emergency fuse system, but the right to ever build on that land again. I didn't tell her. I let the city post the notice. Bright yellow, stapled to the fence. She saw it at sunrise. The moment her kingdom officially shrank forever. That night, she finally cracked. She showed up on my porch with trembling hands and eyes full of venom. She didn't knock. She just stood there, breathing like she'd climbed a mountain. "I know it was you," she said, voice low and raw. "Me," I said, sipping tea. "I just live here." She stood there another 10 seconds, fists clenched, then turned and walked away, silent, defeated, and very, very aware that she'd declared war on someone who never needed to raise his voice to win. When a tyrant falls, there's always a second or two where they think they can rise again. Glenda spent those seconds filing appeals. I know this because she showed up, again, at the county zoning office while I was there renewing my permit for an expanded water catchment tank. She walked in like she owned the place, armed with a manila folder and a face stretched tight with fake calm. I was at the front desk when I heard her voice behind me say, "Excuse me, I need to file an urgent injunction regarding an illegal land transfer by a rogue neighbor exploiting bureaucratic loopholes." I turned around slowly. "Morning, Glenda," I said. "Love the new vocabulary." She went rigid. The zoning clerk, who clearly knew her by reputation, smiled politely and gestured for her to wait. I finished my business, signed the necessary forms, and took my sweet time leaving, making sure to toss my empty coffee cup in the trash can right next to her purse. I didn't say another word. I didn't have to. Because the clerk already knew what I knew. Glenda had no legal claim, no standing, and no understanding of what a conservation easement actually meant. She'd walked in expecting to reverse a property transfer like it was a bad Amazon order. Instead, she walked out with nothing but a stamp on her appeal reading "Rejected," out of jurisdiction. She didn't go down quietly. Back in the neighborhood, she doubled down on her last remaining strategy: weaponized drama. She organized community watch patrols that didn't patrol anything, installed a yard sign that read, "Property rights equals community rights," and started sending mass emails about resisting unlawful environmental encroachment. Some neighbors humored her. Most unsubscribed. I, naturally, just watched it all happen through my new window blinds, ones that automatically closed whenever she approached my property line. A week later, her house went dark again. This time, it wasn't me. A squirrel got into her attic and gnawed through the insulation around a key wire junction. The power company posted a notice warning of a fire hazard and cut service until she got it fixed. Her generator, cobbled together by 3 different contractors and an ex-boyfriend she once called the Tesla of dating, refused to start. I saw her standing in the driveway with a flashlight, whacking the fuse box with a broom handle. That's when she cracked, publicly. Saturday morning, the HOA sent out a surprise meeting notice with a big red urgent label. It was hosted in Cheryl's driveway. Glenda arrived late, wearing mismatched shoes, holding a half-eaten Pop-Tart and a clipboard full of nonsense. She launched into a tirade about my electrical tyranny, how the HOA had been infiltrated by anti-development extremists, and even, at one point, accused me of wiretapping her toaster. Cheryl cut her off mid-sentence. "Glenda," she said in a tired voice, "you're no longer the president." Glenda froze. "What are you talking about?" "We voted," Cheryl replied. "Last night. You weren't there. It was unanimous. Stan's the new president." Stan, who was halfway through a Diet Coke, raised the can like he'd just won a raffle. "Hey Glenda! You can't do that," she barked. "You don't have the authority." "Per the bylaws you wrote last year," Cheryl said, now scrolling through her phone, "if the president is found to have misappropriated funds or acted without board consensus on land matters, they can be removed by majority vote. You wrote it in to get rid of Joel." I nearly choked on my lemonade. Glenda looked around the group, eyes wide, waiting for someone to step in. No one did. Not even her most loyal minion, Denise, who suddenly found something fascinating on the ground near her sandal. She dropped the clipboard, walked away. And that, for the rest of the neighborhood, was the end. But not for me. Because I knew something no one else did. That old generator Glenda tried to reroute to her house? It was still illegally wired into her side panel. I'd spotted it during one of her failed repair attempts and traced the wiring with binoculars. And even though it hadn't sparked yet, it was sitting there, live, exposed, and connected to a set of outdoor string lights she'd left hanging from her patio. So I did the neighborly thing. I called the city inspector. Again. He came by Tuesday morning, walked her backyard, took one look at the hacked-together mess of copper, PVC conduit, and duct tape, and flagged her for multiple code violations. The penalty? Mandatory disconnection of all auxiliary power and a $3,000 fine. When Glenda tried to argue, he pointed to her own handwritten diagram that was duct-taped to the side of the shed and said, "You labeled it totally legit wire plan," with a smiley face. She paid. Eventually. But she didn't fix it. She left. Not dramatically. Not in the middle of the night. Just one day, her car was gone. Her windows were dark. A for sale sign stood in the yard, slightly crooked and already sun-faded. She'd listed the house quietly, under her maiden name, hoping no one would notice. But this neighborhood doesn't forget. By the time the listing reached the MLS, the HOA Gossip Network had already plastered every group chat with the title, "The Witch is Leaving." A month later, she was gone. Her house sat empty, echoing with the ghost of board meetings past and unplugged wine coolers. I watched movers load her overstuffed couch into a truck. Watched the sign come down. Watched the last strand of patio lights sway in the wind, unplugged and powerless. And then, for the first time in what felt like years, peace returned to the cul-de-sac. The new board, under Stan's chaotic but well-meaning leadership, began cleaning up her mess. They refunded all remaining donation funds, finally fixed the streetlight that blinked like a horror movie prop, and even asked if I'd consult on an energy-saving plan for the neighborhood. I said I'd think about it. After all, I was just the guy in the cabin. The guy with the goat and the solar array. The guy who never raised his voice, but somehow rewired everything. I sat on my porch that night, Waffles curled at my feet, watching the stars rise over the ridge. No more spotlights. No more screaming. Just the low hum of cicadas and the faint, delicious memory of Glenda's face the moment she realized she'd lost everything she tried to control. And then, just when I thought it was over, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. Unknown number. I pressed play. "Hi, this message is for Mr. My last name." This is Agent Tully with the IRS Office of Investigations. We'd like to follow up regarding your tip submission from earlier this year. If you're available for a quick phone call, we believe you may have been correct in identifying ongoing financial irregularities connected to the HOA organization. Please give us a call. I smiled. Oh, Glenda, it's not over yet. You'd think, after Glenda skipped town in a puff of bitterness and unpaid fines, I'd get to kick back and enjoy the quiet hum of solar power and goat-related serenity. But no. Because when karma starts cooking, sometimes she lets you stir the pot one more time. And I had a ladle in hand. Agent Tully from the IRS wasn't bluffing. When I called him back, he sounded downright giddy to hear from me. Apparently, my original tip, complete with flyers, screenshots, donation tallies, and links to HOA events featuring cash-only raffles, was enough to trigger an inquiry. What they uncovered went deeper than even I expected. Turns out, Glenda hadn't just accidentally forgotten to register the HOA as a nonprofit. She had never opened a separate bank account. All those donations? HOA bake sale proceeds, neighborhood Christmas light contest entries, vendor booth payments? They'd all been dumped straight into her personal checking account for nearly 3 years. Her justification? Efficiency. She'd told the board she was fronting the money and reimbursing herself later, but Agent Tully said it looked more like embezzlement with extra steps. Especially once they found a pattern. HOA funds going in, Sephora and HomeGoods charges coming out. She was literally laundering the neighborhood's pancake breakfast revenue into throw pillows and eye cream. And here's the kicker, because she never officially dissolved the HOA, despite getting booted, she was still listed as its last legal officer of record. Which meant the IRS had her address. Not the house she abandoned, her new one 2 towns over. Guess who bought it for cash, no mortgage? Guess what they found when they got a subpoena for her account? 47 transfers labeled HOA refund reimbursement, and not one matching a vote or receipt. She hadn't just misused a little. She'd siphoned nearly half the funds collected during her entire term, about $8,900. I know. Not cartel money. But enough to get the feds interested when it's coming from fake bake sale permit. Tully thanked me for the documentation, especially the flyers she'd hand-delivered herself. I told him I had plenty more. He asked if I'd be willing to testify if it came to that. I said only if I get to bring my goat and a lawn chair. He laughed. I didn't. Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, life was thriving in Glenda's absence. Cheryl's hydrangeas had started blooming again. Stan painted the HOA mailbox bright blue in open rebellion. The new committee met monthly, but mostly just shared lemonade and talked about which neighbor's cat was stealing everyone's newspapers. The power drama was over. The surveillance was gone. The silence was beautiful. But Glenda, even miles away, still had one last surge left in her. It came in the form of a certified letter addressed to me. Handwritten. Slightly smeared. Postmarked from her new town. I opened it slowly, half expecting glitter to explode out of it. Inside was a 3-page manifesto. The highlights: I engineered a psychological war of attrition. I weaponized infrastructure as intimidation. I destroyed her professional reputation, which was news to me, as I didn't think realtors had reputations anymore. And my favorite, I was a sociopath with a barn full of death machines. The final paragraph read, "Congratulations. You won. But people like you always reveal themselves eventually. I'll be waiting." I took the letter, folded it neatly, and slid it under Waffles' water bowl. He peed on it later. Appropriate. But that wasn't the end of Glenda. No. The end came one sunny Thursday morning, when an unmarked government sedan rolled into the cul-de-sac, parked in front of her old house, and knocked on Stan's door. I watched through my binoculars as a woman in a blazer showed him a badge. He looked surprised. Then he pointed across the street to my cabin. Now I know how this looks. But I wasn't worried. Everything I'd done was legal. Meticulously, deliciously legal. Still, I put down my coffee, walked to the porch, and greeted the agent like I was expecting a package. She introduced herself as Agent Reyes, IRS Criminal Investigations Division. She said she wasn't there to investigate me. She just wanted to clarify a few things, mostly around the timeline of Glenda's donation handling practices and the HOA's banking setup. I invited her in, made tea, even let her feed Waffles an apple. By the time she left, she'd collected every receipt, photo, and copy of the HOA newsletters I'd saved, including the infamous one where Glenda bragged about fully funding the 4th of July fireworks through voluntary community trust. Reyes left smiling. Said, "You're very thorough, Mr. Redacted." I said, "I'm very motivated." 2 weeks later, the hammer dropped. Glenda was officially indicted. 5 counts: wire fraud, tax evasion, misappropriation of community funds, and 2 counts of obstructing a municipal investigation. Remember those permits she tried to backdate? Yeah, bad idea. Her arraignment was public. I didn't attend, but someone posted the mugshot online. Her hair wasn't shellacked this time. Her pearls were gone. The clipboard, presumably, had been confiscated as evidence. The fallout was glorious. News spread fast. Local blogs. Nextdoor threads. Someone even made a parody video where Waffles was voiced by Morgan Freeman narrating Glenda's downfall like a wildlife documentary. HOA Karens, predators of suburbia. Her new house went up for sale again. This time under a realty firm that specialized in distressed relocations. Her social media vanished. But the neighborhood kept her legend alive in lawn chair retellings. As for me, I got a thank you letter from Agent Tully. A real one. Not boilerplate. He said my report had helped connect 3 other cases in the region involving HOA financial misconduct. Apparently, Glenda had been part of some weird suburban clique that passed around shady budget practices like Pinterest pins. My quiet little cabin had exposed a pattern they'd been trying to trace for years. They offered me a reward, some IRS whistleblower program that paid a percentage. I declined. Told them to buy better paper for their tip forms. What I wanted couldn't be bought. And I'd already earned it. Peace. The kind you feel when no one's snooping over your fence with a camera pretending to measure grass length. The kind that comes from turning the lights on without worrying someone will cut your power out of spite. The kind that hums like a content goat chewing invasive weeds beside your solar array while the wind stirs your wind chimes, freely, uselessly, beautifully. Sometimes I think about Glenda, where she is now. Maybe she's living in a condo, trying to convince someone to form a mini HOA in the building. Maybe she's banned from owning clipboards. Maybe she's plotting revenge in a lined notebook with sparkly gel pens. Doesn't matter. Because I didn't beat her by shouting. I didn't beat her with drama or escalation or revenge fantasies. I beat her by being unshakable, by letting her spiral while I stayed grounded, by holding every receipt, every photo, every ounce of calm while she burned herself down. So yeah, she cut my power. But in the end, I rewired everything, even her.